So, when our partner shuts down on us when we're in the middle of a disagreement, it can be really confusing and frustrating. It can feel like maybe we're being manipulated, or we can sometimes wonder if they even care. And it can be really devastating for a relationship too. It can make it really hard to achieve intimacy and connection and resolve our problems. So, today I want to talk about some possible reasons why our partners might shut down when we are in a disagreement. And hopefully, if you can identify what's going on there, then it might give you a path forward. So, today I'm going to take a little different approach to making this video, and maybe you can let me know how you like it. Instead of doing a bunch of edits, I'm just going to use my notes down here and just continue this like a conversation. So I will be looking away from the camera down at my notes from time to time. And so you can, like I said, let me know what you think. So there are a lot of reasons why someone might just shut down in in an argument. One of which is that they it could be kind of a power assertion of sorts. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're gaslighting or manipulating you. If you sense that there's gaslighting or manipulation, that has kind of some very specific ramifications for a relationship. And if you sense that, then you might check out my video on gaslighting. I'll put a link above and also in the comments, and you can see what you think about that. Um, all relationships have power imbalances. That's or power balances, typically imbalances. That's just kind of a part of it. And when we feel like we're reaching an uncomfortable level of imbalance in a relationship, maybe even in a particular exchange, I think it's a very natural thing to try to level that out to a place where we feel a little more comfortable and confident and safe and secure. Um, Now, one of the ways that we can do that is we can take control of the conversation. Now, one way, of course, is to out yell somebody or to beat them on the merits, if it were. We'll talk about that again in a minute. But one of the easiest ways, one of the simplest ways to control the flow of the conversation is to control whether it's even happening or not. And so shutting down can be a way that we can just try to often subconsciously, and I think this is often a subconscious thing, we just try to level things by just sort of controlling the flow of what's happening. And so sometimes we get to a point where we just say, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And sometimes that is a way of just trying to balance the power scale in the relationship a little bit. I think one of the reasons that people might shut down in a relationship is just if they're feeling flooded, they're feeling overwhelmed with everything that is going on. John Gottman, famous marriage and family researcher, has what he calls the four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and the last one he has is stonewalling. And it can feel like we're being stonewalled, and that what that might look like, there's a lot of ways, but one might be they would just kind of go blank and be like, yep, you're right, you win, I lose, whatever, and just kind of do whatever they can to placate you in the situation. And you feel like you're not really getting anywhere because you haven't really achieved any kind of resolution there, but they're just kind of shutting down. So this overwhelm, or sometimes in Gottman's stonewalling, I think this is actually potentially related to the stress response. Now, of course, the stress response is in all of us. It's this mind-body interaction where we rise to meet a challenge. We fight the tiger. We run away. And the stress response actually occurs for threat or opportunity. But if you're arguing with your partner, it's probably threatening in some way. Even if you're not feeling unsafe in the situation, there's still a challenge being presented to you. What a lot of people don't recognize is that there's more to the stress response than just fight or flight. The third component is freeze. And so think about it. Caveman days. The caveman first may choose to try to fight the tiger. If he realizes he can't beat the tiger, then he runs away. And if he can't run away from the tiger, then he plays dead and hopes the tiger gets bored. I think it's a very natural response in all of us. It's a very natural way that we can respond to stress. And overwhelming stress is going to push us along through that list from fight to flee to freeze. And so if your partner is just shutting down, it could be that they're just emotionally overwhelmed. Their stress response is just too profound in them. And they really have no other option. I don't think often this is a conscious choice. I think sometimes it just happens to us. One other way that people might shut down is if they are experiencing some kind of trauma triggers from the past. Now, trauma looks a lot of different ways. If anyone who's heard me talk about trauma knows I don't really like the way the DSM talks about trauma, because it wants to talk, the DSM wants to talk about trauma as if healthy person has one big event and it changes everything. I don't think trauma really works that way. I think trauma is complex, and I think there are lots of kinds of trauma. Of course, there is the kind of acute trauma that can happen in a lot of different ways that we all could probably make a list. But we also have things like developmental trauma or relational trauma. And these kinds of traumas, when they bubble up for us, it's often not obvious to us when we're in the room. They're not overt, they're not clearly presented, sometimes even to the person experiencing them. I think it's a very common thing to be triggered by our past trauma and not even realize that's what's going on. And so if you suspect that your partner might be experiencing trauma triggers causing them to shut down, might try to go gently. I know that can be frustrating because we may not be able to get resolution on things as quickly as we would like. But I think that if we're leaning into those trauma triggers, it's usually not a very productive path for any of us. So developmental traumas might be ways that someone was just rejected or neglected by a caregiver. Relational trauma can look a lot of different ways. If they're somehow feeling like they've been here before with another partner, even though you're not that person, on some level, if we're traumatized by those past things, on some level in our personal experience, it doesn't matter. Doesn't mean we have to be stuck there, but it is something that I think we need to respect and be aware of. Another reason your partner might be shutting down is there might just be a level of learned helplessness. Again, maybe through past relationships or maybe through experiences with you. Maybe you're just better at arguing than they are. And so if your partner has kind of a learned helplessness because they know they just can't win with you, there's a lot to think about there, because how are we really finding resolution? Are we just sort of bludgeoning someone, metaphorically speaking, into giving us our way? Well, if that's going on, that's something else to look at. But maybe they're just not really good at presenting what they're thinking or their perspective. And so they just are approaching this like, well, you're going to win this argument anyway, so let's just cut to the chase. I'm just going to give in. And so I think if your partner has a level of learned helplessness, then that might be something that you could experience in them. They might just try to save everyone the effort and headache and just get straight to the point. Okay, you win. Sometimes when people shut down, it can be an outgrowth of what we call a pursuer-distancer dynamic. And in this dynamic, one partner is seeking intimacy and closeness and often resolution, and the other one needs space. They fear maybe their loss of identity in the relationship, or they have a reserved communication style, and so these can interact in kind of confusing ways, because often the pursuer may not actually be trying to be aggressive and overwhelming. They're seeking that connection, they're seeking that resolution, trying to right the ship. But if that's happening in a way that the distancer finds somehow uncomfortable emotionally or otherwise, then we're going to have a hard time coming together on that. So if you suspect that might be going on, there are some other resources out there. And I'm planning to do a video in the future on the pursuer-distancer dynamic. And so when I do, I'll put some links in this video as well. And so if that's going on, then that's something to consider. All of these, the way I conceptualize them is they're all, aside from the manipulation control part, they're all ways of seeking safety? And so I think that's always an interesting question when we're frustrated by our partner, when we can ask ourselves, how is my partner seeking safety? What are they doing to try to preserve an emotional distance that they feel safe with? Because I think we all want to feel connected in some way, but it looks really different with every person. Realize that safety comes in many forms. Of course, physical safety is one way. And if your arguments are leading to a lack of physical safety for either of you, obviously something to consider. But there are other things like emotional safety. Do I feel like I'm being seen and heard in my relationship? Are my feelings being considered in a given disagreement or in any disagreement? There's boundary preservation. Sometimes people might shut down because they just fear that I'm kind of losing myself in this. And if this continues, I'm just going to take on whatever you're putting out there anyway. And if someone's working on boundaries, then there can be some effort to preserve that. I think intellectual safety can come up sometimes if there is maybe an insight differential in the relationship, or maybe one person's just smarter than the other one. And again, better at arguing, then we can feel intellectually safe. If you feel like you're the stupid one in the relationship, of course you don't want to have an argument, and that can lead us to just kind of proceed in really unproductive ways. Or spiritual safety. If you feel like somehow there is something, you're being judged or evaluated in a way that you're uncomfortable with, that can definitely show up in relationships. We might shut down in an argument to preserve any or all of those kinds of safety. So something to consider. Now, I'm not encouraging you to psychoanalyze your partner. I never think that's a good idea. Don't put your partner on the couch, okay? There are people who are trained to do this. It's not that you can't get curious about what's going on in your partner. Try to have open, candid conversations about what's going on. But if you're doing that with someone who tends to shut down, we often have to go gently. We have to ask more questions, be patient, and just be very delicate in that. So I think in any relationship, I think things tend to go better when we can hold space for each other's individual relational needs. Those are going to be unique. Those are inarguable. We don't get to decide what our partner's needs are. We just have to decide whether we're going to respect them or not and try to learn about them. The more we can understand them and respect them, often the more the relationship can sustain. And if you need, just try to consider seeking support from a qualified provider. Often a provider such as myself or others who can sit down with you and help you learn to kind of get out of the weeds. And I work a lot on just taking what we call a bird's eye view of the relationship. And we begin to understand these larger processes that are going on, and we can learn how to communicate with our partners in ways that they can accept, understand, engage with. They don't feel so overwhelmed. Then hopefully we can move forward. Hey friends, I hope you found this valuable, and I am always grateful for the gift of your time and attention. So I hope to have you here next time, and until then, be well.